In a lot of ways, its culture is indicative of its history, as is its location. You know, it's a big part of their culture. So, the first little bit we're going to talk about today is actually history. And by little bit, I mean a little tiny bit. I'm giving a crash course in European history, which, we're not going to go into near as much detail as, say, we will next year when we start World Civ, but you get an idea, sure. Just started it. So what I thought I'd start off with is a timeline. That's the history of the world, more or less as we have it up into the modern times. You'll see that we have not only the timeline in the center, but also the different places around the world. And this is actually from a website I used to use quite a lot called hyperhistorytext.com. And what's neat about it is each of those things are links, so you can kind of like learn a little bit about the history if you're like not really sure what it is they're talking about. But it's pretty handy, and it gives you an idea of kind of what it is we're talking about. So we're saying European history, right? That's quite a lot. We start back here in the before the Common Era, all the way to modern times, and look at the U.S. right there. Oh, look how cute we are, little bitties. So, comparatively, we're nothing when it comes to the history of other places. Oh yeah, China's much larger. Although, one thing we're going to talk about with China, you see all those different names? Those are different dynasties. And one of the things that's unique about China, more so than any other place, is that they're really good at turning a conquest into a new Chinese empire. Whereas a lot of places you get conquered, well, there goes your culture and just gets smashed by whoever conquered you. In China, they had a habit of making whoever conquered them Chinese. So even though those are different dynasties, those are different conquests. Those are different kingdoms, different empires. It's just they were able to kind of continue things going because they were really well organized. So that is kind of a unique thing, but we'll get to that later. The important thing is we're going to talk about sort of everything Europe and some of the traditions and things like that. So we talked about feudalism, we talked about the Middle Ages, and we talked about going into the Renaissance. After that, we have a few changes. The birth of the scientific era, the scientific revolution, and leading into the Enlightenment. So you guys know things like unalienable rights. What does that word mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, rights that you are born with. Can they be taken away? Yes. By the government for certain crimes, right? For instance, what are often the unalienable rights we say in the United States that everybody has? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Right? Can that be taken away? Absolutely. You can lose your life if you are guilty of a capital crime. You can lose your property. You can lose your freedom. All those things can be, in theory, taken away, but otherwise it's assumed that you're born with them and they shouldn't be taken away very likely. All these ideas stem from the Enlightenment, a period where philosophy started being applied to a lot of different things, including science. In addition, we started to get into an era where machine power was being utilized to replace the work of humans and animals. That's called the Industrial Revolution. And what's interesting is it really hasn't ever stopped. In fact, it's arguable that we're in a second great industrial revolution right now because we're getting at the beginning of technology that will dramatically alter the way we live our lives. I mean, you guys are already doing it right now. How many of you guys have tablets or computers that you carry around with you at all times? The answer is all of you, for the most part. I mean, the fact is, calling this a phone is not really an accurate description of what it can do, is it? I mean, yes, it can make phone calls, but it can do so much more. And the simple act of calling it a phone almost limits your kind of understanding of what it does. And I was talking to my father-in-law this weekend about why he needs a smartphone, because he's got sisters all around the world, and communicating easier with them. He still writes letters, for God's sake. He didn't have email. I finally set up an email account for him 2 months ago. His whole idea of a phone, I make phone calls on it. Yes, but you can also communicate with them in real time, regardless of where they are. And so, that kind of mentality is hard for him to swallow. And part of it is age, but mostly it's what you're used to. The thing to consider is this, right? Technology is constantly changing, but there's also paradigm shifts that occur that change the way we think about how everything works. A great example of that we're kind of on the cusp is is auto transportation. So right now, if you want to go from point A to point B, what are your options? Car, bus, plane, train, automobile, sure, all those things. I'm on a boat. It depends on what your daily need is, right? Most of us don't need a boat every day. Most of us don't need a plane every day. Most of us could maybe use a train, but we don't really have those. We don't really have very good public transportation here, so we rely on private for a lot of cases, right? You get a car. The cars are kind of what we're obsessed with, if you think about it. How many of you guys are already planning on what you're going to do when you first get a car? You want your first car, right?
Yeah.
So you guys know that's fine. Right.
I
So-
can drive.
Here's the thing, right? Let's talk about self-driving cars, okay? That is a technology that isn't coming. It is here, and it works. They're already driving. There have been self-driving cars in California for a few years now. Moving around. Oh yeah, they've been around for 2 decades. Yeah. Yeah, they've been around for a long, long, long time. I'm talking about vehicles where you get into it, you say, take me here, and it goes. Right? That is here, and it's now, and it works, and it's better than people. The thing that freaks out a lot of people is like, well, what if it gets in a wreck? And dude, 40,000 people die every year on American streets because of drunk drivers, because of texting, because of sleeping while driving. Cars never do that if they self-drive.
It's like it feels weird. Like I've never tried it, but it was just like.
And that's when you hit the nail on the head. It feels weird, right? That can be applied to literally any technology. And historically speaking, there have always been those who are so against technology they are violent. They're called the Luddites. It was originally a religious group in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, but we apply that term to mean people who are technologically hostile. They can't fathom these changes, and they see it as dangerous, and it actually attacks them on a mental level. It's subconscious and psychological. But the thing is, if you think about it, self-driving cars offer a tremendous advantage in many, many, many different ways. Number one, as I said, they're already safer. Two, they allow people to sort of minimize the amount of public parking space necessary. And if you think about it, if your car can drive itself, you can have it drop you off work, say go home, and off it goes. It just stays there until it's ready to pick you up at whatever time you need it to. In fact, you can take it one step further. Tesla already has a thing called the fleet system, where you can actually hire out your car as a cabbie while you're not using it. So you say, go make me money, Tesla, and off it goes to collect fares for you.
Now I want a self-driving car.
Right? Another thing, though, that makes people weirded out, right? Think about this. A lot of the reason why your parents maybe have to drop you off at school is because you might be too young to drive. Just put you in the car and say, all right, take the car.
Oh my gosh, you can tell to go get food through the drive-thru.
But then what would it pay for?
Well, that's a great question. Hypothetically, if you did it through an app, you could pay through the app like you do if you order from Qdoba, right?
Like, just put it in the red car, please.
Exactly. It can be set to a number. That's the point, though. So you think about it. Personally, I'm really excited about self-driving cars because my parents have a condo that's a 10-hour drive. I want to get in my car at like midnight and say, take me to the condo, go to sleep, wake up, and
Oh, I
I'm
don't know
here.
if I can do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
That'd be kind of scary.
I can't fall asleep in cars.
You go close.
Are you actually in?
My point, though, is that we're talking about an entire different way we think about how life could function, yeah? And that's not even get to the really crazy stuff, like talking about 3D printing and all that kind of thing.
Think about when you're like old enough to have kids and stuff, you probably have a car that drives your kids and stuff.
Yeah, there was actually there's one science, I forget who it is, one engineer said that kids that are born today will never learn to drive. Because by the time they're old enough, everything will be self-driving.
That's crazy.
Another thing you haven't considered yet is how many people make their living through driving other people place to place. The answer is 40%. So what we're talking about is 40% of the population suddenly losing their job. During the Great Depression, 25% of the people lost their job. So we're talking an economic disaster that is worse than the Great Depression unless things change. And the thing is, people just like, well, I don't like this, we should stop. Never going to work. Technology always moves forward regardless of what people personally feel comfortable with. So things will change. I'm not saying that's a bad thing either.
Yeah.
It just means that we'll have to find other means like we've always done. Consider this. 150 years ago, 70 to 80% of the population of the United States made their living through farming. Now it's less than 2%. And yet we have more than we ever had. Technology creates more with less effort. So we see changes, yes? Changes have been happening for centuries. After that, we progress in what we would consider the modern world. The first modern war was World War I. And it's also one of the reasons it was so devastating. 20 million people died in the war. Then World War II followed, and 32 million people died. And we entered an atomic age and a Cold War, which we are still dealing with the impacts of today. Living in a nuclear age changes everything. And I don't just mean in a war kind of standpoint. I mean, the type of technology we're dealing with now has been changing so ungodly rapidly, it's unbelievable. I mean, consider this. Do you guys know how much memory your phones have right now? 16? I think mine's, I believe, 32 gigabytes. My personal computer when my wife and I when we first got married, I believe had 16 gigabytes. So my phone is 2 times more powerful than our desktop computer was 10 years ago. We're talking about speeds that are just unbelievably fast compared to, oh man, you want a crazy experience, boot up a computer with a solid-state hard drive. Fun times. I love dating myself too, like I am right now, because like, you know, someone's going to listen to this in the future, like, oh my God, remember when those came out? You know, maybe they use jam computers now in the future, I don't know. But yeah. Here's a great example, right? Here's a great example. You guys know, like, if you have a computer that's completely turned off, you turn it on, how long does it take to boot up the computers?
Like 30 seconds.
Solid state's more like 2. If you turn it on, they're ready to go.
Wait, you mean a future maybe?
No, ones are now. Like my personal computer does that now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, solid state is amazing. True.
So what would it be in the future, like, regarding that?
It would, yeah, I don't know. It was there before you needed it.
It's way your hand in this thing.
Well, I mean, that's another thing. You think about interfaces. They've changed dramatically. I remember when the first touchscreens came out in like the 90s. And they were really horribly inaccurate. And I was like, no one's ever going to use they're everywhere now. I mean, it's a reality of life. Who knows what technology will be out in the future? I mean, well, that's the thing it's technology. The real change isn't whenever new stuff is invented. It's when the stuff that's invented gets cheap. And that's what we're talking about, some of the changes that could happen. We don't know. Futurism it gets a little weird because you can always look at stuff that didn't happen and laugh about how, like, you know, asinine it was. Like, I remember watching sci-fi movies back in the 90s that my dad used to watch when he was a kid, and it's like, you know, in 2000, we're on Mars and all this kind of stuff.
Like in Back to the Future when they go to 2015.
Exactly.
That was hilarious.
Yeah.
And they were running
And, you know, we don't know. But, I mean, that's it's not that kind of stuff that's really crazy. It's the stuff that is available now that's kind of interesting. And so, you know, tying this back to what we're discussing, historically speaking, this has meant that Europe has been engaging in conflicts with one another and changes with one another for literally centuries. And that heavily influences their cultural understandings and sort of how they view the world. So, one picture real quick to finish up. That tends to be what most people think about. You know, unfortunately, we're really bad about covering a lot of European history, but, you know, just understand there's more to it than that, you know. You guys know what that is, right? Auschwitz concentration camp? Yeah. Auschwitz, I think, I could be wrong. There's been a few. Anyways, so as we said, it was one of the first in the world to industrialize, largely because of technology that was developed and improved. Guys like James Watt, Alfred Nobel, all of them contributed new technological innovations. As far as how people live there today, most people find themselves working in what we would call a post-industrial economy. That is to say, most people don't work in factories in Europe. They work in service industries, much like we do in the United States. Though, of course, it depends on where you are. There's certainly more rural areas, and they contribute a lot to the other things, but there's been a lot of high-tech development in recent years, especially. Now, of course, nuclear power is one of the main productions of energy in this area. And one thing I have to understand is nuclear energy, it's actually a bunch of different types of sciences, a different type of reactors, a different type of things to generate electricity. But it's pretty interesting stuff. As far as tourism is concerned, this area, of course, is also pretty large. This is Northern Europe, by the way. If you think about it, if you wanted to visit Europe, where would you want to go?
London, Poland.
That's Eastern Europe. I don't know. But my point was is that we had three people saying countries in Northern Europe. Most people, when they think of Europe and places they want to go, they're thinking Northern Europe. They don't think so much Southern as much, although there are those who say the way Greece, yeah, some will go to Spain.
I said London.
The point though about Europe though, and something I have to understand is like if you go to Europe, you can see a lot of different places if you don't mind traveling a lot in a relatively short period of time. For instance, how many of you guys have ever driven, say, to Florida?
Maybe tell us the story of like I forgot who it was, but they wanted to go to all these places.
Exactly. Driving to Florida, no big deal, right? The equivalent distance in Europe is the distance of driving from London to Romania. Yeah, that's a huge amount of distance you can cover. Now, I would not recommend that. You know, that means you'll see everywhere for a very brief period of time, usually through the window of a train, but you can do it hypothetically. With that being said, there's a tremendous amount of money that comes to these countries simply from people wanting to stare at old things. I mean, think about it, how many people go and pay to visit, like, the Crown Jewels in London, which is basically a collection of shiny rocks. You know? I mean, literally, it's kind of creepy when you think about how many people go to watch the Queen and the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, because it's basically a bunch of random weird strangers coming and staring at you through your fence. You know, it's pretty odd. But it brings in a ridiculous amount of money. In addition to that, Northern European countries are often known for producing luxury items. Now, that's not to say that even plays a slight majority of their economics, but it is something that we tend to think about and kind of influences how we think about these countries. So, for instance, can someone name for me an expensive car?
Ferrari.
A Tesla depends, you know. Lamborghinis, Porsches, Ferrari, okay, what else? What's that? Maserati, yeah. You're good. All those are examples of European cars. Yeah. Not Mustang, obviously, that's a Ford. Although I would argue that's not really that expensive. You can get a Mustang for like 10 grand. If you don't mind it used. Yeah. Yes, some, but not most. I mean, comparatively, if you're talking like an expensive Ford, we're talking like a GT. You know, those guys can get up to like the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. Hang on, I'll show you a picture of one of these things. Anyways, but the thing is, like, let's talk Lamborghini for a second, right? Your average Lamborghini, that's good, a slightly expensive Lamborghini. Let's say $250,000. That's an expensive car, right?
Yes.
Okay, Bugatti Veyron, one of the fastest production cars ever made, is $2 million. There are cars made by Bentley and Aston Martin that actually have no price tag. You have to ask, you can't afford it. There's features in it that are just like, you wouldn't think of even needing. They're made for like insane amounts of comfort, right? For the super, 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 super wealthy. No, you cannot, you know, build an economy just on that. But if you are in that business, you can make a good chunk of money doing that.
What type of luxury?
Let's have a look at one real quick, shall we? I believe it is the Rolls-Royce Phantom is what I was
Oh my
on.
gosh, those cars
Yeah, so it starts at $500,000.
Yeah, these cars have curtains in them. Don't they?
So they cost that much?
I wouldn't want
No.
to drive it just because I read it.
No, you don't drive it. If you can afford one of those, you don't drive. You have other people drive for you. They're not made for the comfort of the driver. They're made for the comfort of the passenger.
David, backseat has so much space.
Mm.
That's it.
Yeah, they're designed for the comfort of the person.
It's like an airplane.
Yeah. The point is that that's probably the Phantom. The what?
They're ugly on the inside, though. Some of them are.
They're not very pretty on the outside.
$4.8 million.
It's a
Oh, sorry. Now you guys are looking at expensive cars, right?
yeah, we're looking at it, bro.
But there's other examples as well, such as Swiss watches. It's funny to think like, watches, right? It's one of those types of things like you think like, why do you need an expensive watch? It's a timekeeper, right? But at the same time, right? What was it? I remember reading somewhere that Elvis was meeting with the Rolling Stone one time. He was hanging out, and like Elvis was notoriously generous to people, like
So we gave them.
yeah, well, like things like that. Basically, like Keith Richards like lost his watch or something like while hanging out. He's like, oh, I'll get you. I got you. I'll get you one. And hands him one that's like covered in diamonds.
Who lost his watch?
Keith Richards.
Oh.
Yeah. And just stuff like that. Like Elvis, like I remember one time, like he ended up like there's somebody who was like a valet for him or something like that, and his car got stolen, so he just bought him another one, type stuff like that. Elvis was a cool dude. Whenever you make that much money, you can do that. But anyways, the point is that we have, and this color is how we tend to think of it. There's a reason why Europeans tend to get, it's assumed that they're very sophisticated and, there's a lot of cultural elements, because basically they were the cultural center of the world for hundreds of years. Not so much anymore. And that actually is one of the reasons why there's some animosity between certain European countries and ourselves. In fact, I read a pretty good article saying that one of the main reasons that people are kind of snarky in France about speaking French properly is because, really French was the language of the UN. French was the cultural language in Europe, and now they're just kind of like, that's America this, America that, and it's kind of like, how do you just go from being the most powerful, important nation on earth to being, basically made fun of in Saturday morning cartoons? It's kind of a hard pill to swallow. There are other changes too, by the way, things that are different, I would point out. One of them is that, of course, urbanization is tremendous, and there's a lot more people for a smaller square area in Europe, being as it's a smaller place, as you can imagine. And this, of course, influences personal space. As a general rule, space in Europe tends to be closer together. This can actually influence quite a lot of things, but one of the main things is that people tend to spend a lot more time using public spaces. So, for instance, parks, cafes, things like that. If you're going to go entertain friends, you tend to do it at one of these public places, not so much in your house. Although you certainly can in your house. I don't want to make it seem like everyone in Europe lives in tiny houses. That's far from the truth. But I will say this, spaces tend to be smaller. And it tends to, Americans who go there tend to be kind of weirded out a little bit. Great example of that, have you guys seen House Hunter International?
Yes.
Now, a lot of times those are really expensive places, which is why they're so small. So, depending on where you're moving to, it can also change really dramatically. And of course, there are more expensive places. But, the point is that this is kind of a generalization. As I said, most folks do tend to rely on public transportation over personal. Although, again, it also doesn't mean people don't have vehicles. They do. A lot of people do. And, in fact, they tend to be smaller. Although, again, not necessarily like, don't think like tiny cars. For instance, you guys know a Honda Civic? That's kind of the size of car we're talking about. They do have pickup trucks and things like that, but their trucks are much, much smaller than ours. And of course, it also depends on where you are. Some places they don't even really use cars. Like, for instance, there's some cities in Italy that predominantly get around by motor scooter. because if you think about it, it's a tropical climate, so you don't really have to worry about, sudden snow, thing like that, and it's heavily efficient. That also is largely because gas prices are way more expensive. I don't remember what they are nowadays, but it used to be around $8 or $9, the equivalent of $8 or $9 per gallon, which is way higher. So, you kind of make do. Public crime is way down comparatively to the United States, and there's been a lot of cultural give and take between Europe and ourselves. If you think about bands that are popular from Europe, you can see that there's quite a few.
One Direction.
Sure. Well, I'm just saying that would be an example. The Beatles is the one that comes to mind for me.
That was the one that came to mind too.
Yeah. Also, ABBA is another one.
Oh, they're from Europe?
Yeah, they're from Switzerland, I believe. Norway.
Who?
ABBA.
Who's that?
They did Mamma Mia, yeah. They did,
Queen.
yeah.
I love that movie.
So, there are many more examples too. I mean, there's this kind of relationship that we have. What's that?
Isn't Adele British?
Yes.
I'm about to say, you're asking the wrong dude. I have no idea.
He jams out to Adele.
Oh, it's Shakira all the day.
I love to see.
Well, she's Colombian, I think. Partially Colombian and also Lebanese. Is she Venezuelan?
I don't know.
I thought
No,
she was
she's
Colombian.
Colombian.
I could be wrong. I don't know. I have one song from her on my phone, and that's because my kids like Zootopia. So,
Oh, is it the?
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is an example of a record song, actually. I was going to do something real quick. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to show you guys. Have I showed you the 4 chord song video yet?
No.
This is a thing I usually show around the time of World Civ, we talk about music theory, but I really like this video because it deals with kind of how we write songs as artists, and showing a lot of similarities here. So I think this is a good place to show this video. We'll talk about that in a second. Let me stop the recording.